move on with the second presentation from Marinella Leone.
Okay, so thank you so much for being here. This is a joint work with Michela Carlana and Shule Alam from Cornell University. So I'm going to talk about inclusive teaching, spotting social isolation in the classroom. So let me give you a bit of motivation of what really motivated this study. So we know that the social environment for a child is crucial for his cognitive and non-cognitive development. And also that schools actually are let's say, the place where kids play, interact, and learn. So they're really social hubs for children. However, at the same time, schools can also be very detrimental if a child actually experiences, let's say, some antisocial behaviors from peers, for example, bullying or violence from other friends, or let's say not so friends, or if they actually feel social isolated or lonely. So there is some evidence, mostly in the medical or social psychology literature, showing how social isolation can actually lead to, is correlated with low self-esteem, a diminished sense of belonging, and if this feeling becomes chronic over time, it can really lead to very, detrimental outcomes, or even to suicidal thoughts. And also, loneliness is also this is really correlational studies, so we haven't found really rigorous evidence on that. Loneliness is associated with poor economic performance, as well as disengagement for schools, from schools, which, if you think about it in the long term, can also lead, of course, to worse outcome in the labor market, as well as other related aspects, which could be crime and so on. So, so here I was just took some data from the PISA 2022, which shows the proportion of kids, of students feeling lonely at schools. So if you can see, there are countries where actually this percentage is not that low. So Italy is a little bit below 15%, which is still, a relevant proportion of students whose, let's say, perception of loneliness is quite high. So what can we do about that? So first of all, like very generally, we want to really create a cohesive and supportive school environment. And so, how can we do that? We should try and spot and address social isolation and segregation in schools and in the classrooms more specifically. So we really need to make sure that classrooms and schools more generally are really enjoyable, become really enjoyable learning experience for all students. And importantly, we want to intervene early on. So there is some recent literature showing how this type of skills, the social skills, are really malleable in childhood, and so you can actually change some of these skills, and you can really do something about that. And schools become, indeed, as I was mentioning before, an ideal setting for that. And mostly, importantly, for disadvantaged children from disadvantaged background, because actually schools could be the only opportunity for these children to interact and to develop their social skills. So, what do we do in this paper? So, the question we ask is, how can we prevent and address social exclusion and isolation in childhood? And what we do is to intervene, first of all, on teachers. So, I'm going to be a little bit more specific on what we do exactly. But just to give you a preview of what we do is that we provide teachers with information about the prevalence of social isolation in the classroom. So we provide teachers with a detailed classroom friendship network maps. And also we inform teachers on the detrimental potential effects of social exclusion on child development. And we really try to emphasize the key role that teachers have in trying to, let's say, adjust any, let's say, prevalence of isolation or exclusion phenomena in the classroom. And we also try to offer them some practical tips to, let's say, deal with this prevalence. Let me tell you how we do that. Yes, sorry. How we do that. So we do it through an experimental design. So we had a sample of 46 primary schools in Italy, in 3 regions of Italy: Lombardy, Lazio, and Piemonte. We designed our treatment, so this information treatment for the teachers, using information that we gathered from the baseline data. So we collect data at baseline, so like the initial data from grade 2. We therefore have a map of these networks, and we built on that, on the basis of that and on additional information that we got from the baseline data, our intervention, our information intervention. So we implemented it, as I said, as a clustered RCT at the school level. So the baseline data were collected in the autumn of 2021, and then data we went back after 1 year in the spring 2022. So we had about 2,200 students and about 240 teachers and 46 schools, as I was mentioning. So let me give you a few more details about the interventions. So this is an information treatment with 2 main components. The first component is that we prepared these personalized reports that we gave to teachers for their classroom. And so these reports included these classroom friendship network maps based on the baseline data that we had. And so I will tell you how we measured this network. So basically we asked to each child to nominate up to 3 friends in their classroom. Who are your best friends in this classroom? They could nominate up to 3 friends. So this is how we built this network maps. And then, so we provided them, so this report included this information, and then it included some statistics on the prevalence of social isolation in the classroom. So what is the percentage of children not nominated or not nominating anyone in the classroom. So these are what we define as in-degree ties or out-degree ties. So this is the terminology in the network literature. And we also shown them how the heterogeneity of this prevalence. So we showed, indeed, that there was some variations by, not surprisingly, by socioeconomic status and by migrant background. Indeed, what we found is that those that were more isolated were those from lower socioeconomic background and those from a migrant background status. And the second component is a meeting that we organized with teachers where we provided more general information about these negative consequences of social isolation, as well as potential long-term detrimental effects. We also bring in some neuroscientific evidence of what happens when a child feels isolated. So it really activates one part of the brain, I cannot repeat the name, it's the one part of the brain, it's the cortex, oh god. Anyway, and so the second thing that we did is that we revealed that there was a higher prevalence of social exclusion relative to what teachers perceived. So we asked teachers, what is your perceived prevalent social isolation in the classroom, and their perception was definitely lower than the observed one. And then we gave them, as I said, information on this heterogeneity of social isolation, and also showed that social isolation was correlated with poor mental health status and poor sense of belonging to schools. And finally, as I said, we told them what can they do, these practical tips. So I'm going to go very quickly on that. So we measured, so the key measures are classroom social networks, so this in-degree and out-degree ties, so how many friends do you nominate and from how many friends are you nominated. And from there, we built these measures of social exclusion and social isolation. So you're going to be socially excluded if you don't nominate anyone from your friends. And then we have measures of social inclusion, which are also built on this network dimension. Then we have measures of antisocials and pro-social behaviors. And we measure them through incentivized games. Then, for those interested, I'm going to explain you how we did that. We did these behavioral games that we designed very carefully, that we implemented in each class. And finally, we have some item response questionnaires where we have measures of children's mental health, sense of belonging to school, and their perception of support from teachers. So. These are like some of the descriptive of the prevalence of social isolation in our sample. So on average, we find that about 15% of students are actually socially isolated, so it's a quite high prevalence. And as I said, there is a significant heterogeneity. So we find that 31% versus 13% are socially isolated, and 17% are socially isolated from low SES compared to 11% from high SES. And then we clearly find that these are really correlated with lower mental health, lower sense of belonging to school, and lower ability. So let me move to the results. So I've summarized them here, the 3 key results in one slide. So what we find is that indeed this intervention decreased social exclusion. So we find that students in treated school are actually 1.5 percentage points less likely to report having no friends in the classroom. So these are really isolated kids. So someone that reports, I have no friends, basically, is really, really isolated. And this represents a 50% reduction relative to the control group. Then we find an increase in social inclusion. So we find that students in these treated schools actually received significantly more nominations, so are nominated by their friends more time as friends from classmates. And finally, we find this very, let's say, strong effect on a reduction in antisocial behaviors. So we find that in students in treated schools are, we find this 7 percentage points reduction in the probability of, well, I don't have time to explain the game, in sabotaging, so to act very badly with their classmates. And this represents a reduction of 11% relative to the control group. So, so this is I don't have time to go into the details of that, but basically this shows our results on social isolation and social inclusion. These are the results that I just showed on antisocial and pro-social behaviors. We don't find any effect on pro-social behaviors. So we see that our effects are mostly driven by a reduction really in antisocial behaviors relative to an improvement in pro-social behaviors. And then we try to explore a little bit the mechanisms. So what we find is that we find a weak, although positive, improvement in these item response questions, like children's mental health, sense of belonging to school, and perception of teachers. They're not statistically significant, although the sign is going towards the right direction. And then we also have some information on teachers, and so what we see is that it seems that this effect is probably through an increase in teachers adopting more inclusive practices in the classroom. So these teachers actually increasing this, let's say, habit of grouping students with different background. So indeed we find here a decrease in this statement that group students with the same ability level. So here it means that the teachers started to mix more students of different ability, of different background together to work together. And this probably likely reduced this opportunity for antisocial behaviors by indeed increasing this, let's say, contact among kids. So, among socially isolated children. To conclude, from this, let's say, quite simple intervention, what we find is that this informational treatment that was designed to increase teachers' awareness and teachers' information about social dynamics within the classrooms, actually effectively reduced social isolation and improved and curbed antisocial behaviors, and we also find it's quite cost effective compared to other policies. What could be the policy implications? So the idea is that just providing this basic information to teachers can actually be very effective. And if we think of, from a scalability point of view, this would simply imply that we could train teachers to try to assess the classroom networks independently, so without us incentivizing that, but perhaps they can do it by themselves. So what's next? So what we cannot say still is what is the impact on school performance. So we could probably do that now that our kids are about to end, so this year going to be in the grade 5, so we could actually test whether our intervention also had an effect on their test scores. And in principle, we could follow these children over time to see whether there is actually a long-term effect. So what we found is that there is very little evidence of the long-term effects of isolation and loneliness on these outcomes. So thank you so much.